A black CEO walks into his own company, dressed like any other man. But before he can say a word, the receptionist looks him up and down and tells him to wait outside. She has no idea who he is, or that this moment is about to cost the entire company everything. Because just hours later, every employee receives an email that shakes their world. The CEO is shutting it all down. Why would a man destroy his own empire over a single encounter? And what happens when he decides to rebuild, but this time, without the people who ignored him? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The rain tapped steadily against the tall windows of Kofi Mensah's Brooklyn brownstone, creating a soothing rhythm that normally helped him focus. But this morning, the words on his tablet screen demanded more than just focus. They stirred something deeper, more personal. Kofi sat cross-legged on his favorite leather armchair, a steaming cup of black tea warming his hands. He wore what he called his thinking clothes, a well-worn gray hoodie that had seen him through countless coding sessions, and a pair of comfortable jeans. His bare feet pressed against the cool hardwood floor, grounding him as he scrolled through the report again. The head of culture's message had come marked as urgent, but its contents weren't surprising. Anonymous complaints filled page after page, subtle dismissals in meetings, assignments given based on appearance rather than merit, casual comments that cut deep. Though no names were attached, Kofi could read the pain between the carefully worded lines. He recognized it, the same kind he'd swallowed silently for years while building his first startup. Taking another sip of tea, Kofi closed his eyes. The rain seemed louder now, matching the growing unease in his chest. He'd built Halcyon Dynamics with a clear vision, a company where talent mattered more than appearance, where innovation could come from anyone. But here was proof that old patterns had crept in, wearing business casual and hiding behind polite smiles. "Not this time," he murmured, setting down his cup with quiet determination. He picked up his phone and typed a brief message to Andre, his CTO and former protege. "Might drop by today." Simple, casual, giving nothing away about the storm brewing in his mind. Kofi moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. A quick shower, a fresh black t-shirt under the same comfortable hoodie, and his most worn-in sneakers. No suit, no tie, no costume of authority. He wanted to see his company as it really was, not as it performed for its founder. In his garage, he bypassed the luxury cars that came with his success, choosing instead the gray sedan he used for grocery runs. Before starting the engine, he turned off location sharing on his phone, a habit from years of protecting his privacy. Few people knew that Halcyon's brilliant founder was a quiet Ghanaian immigrant who preferred hoodies to suits. He'd kept it that way on purpose, letting his work speak louder than his skin. As Kofi navigated through Brooklyn's rain-slicked streets toward Manhattan, memories surfaced like old photographs. The countless pitch meetings where investors spoke only to his white co-founder. The security guards who followed him through his own office building. The surprise on people's faces when they realized who he was, surprise that too often masked something uglier. He'd built Halcyon from those experiences, coding late into the night, turning frustration into innovation. The company's AI systems were designed to be truly neutral, to see patterns without prejudice. But AI could only be as unbiased as the humans who built and used it. Traffic thinned as he crossed the bridge, the rain creating a gray curtain between him and the Manhattan skyline. Kofi thought about Andre, wondering if his protege recognized the same patterns Kofi saw in the complaints. Andre had risen through the tech world's ranks as one of the few black CTOs in the industry. Did he see himself as proof the system worked? Or did he carry the same weight Kofi did? The responsibility of being the first or the only. Halcyon's headquarters rose before him, 50 stories of glass and steel reaching into the clouded sky. Kofi pulled into the public parking garage across the street, choosing a spot far from the reserved executive section. He sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, gathering his thoughts like tools for the task ahead. The lobby was quiet when he entered, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Modern art adorned the walls, carefully chosen pieces by diverse artists. He remembered approving them himself. The space was designed to feel welcoming, innovative, open to all. But intention wasn't always enough. Behind the sleek reception desk, Amanda sat speaking into her headset, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped at her keyboard as she talked. She glanced up at Kofi's approach, and he watched her expression shift, the laugh fading, her eyes narrowing as they took in his casual clothes, his quiet presence. He'd seen that look before, the quick assessment, the dismissal, the assumption that he couldn't possibly belong in this pristine space. Amanda ended her call mid-laugh and stood, grabbing a clipboard as if it were a shield. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached him, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone already carrying a note of annoyance, as if his presence was an interruption to her day rather than the purpose of her job. Kofi stood still, letting the moment stretch, feeling the weight of every complaint he'd read that morning. In this simple interaction, he saw the truth of those reports, the subtle ways people could be made to feel small, unwelcome, other. It wasn't always about what was said. Sometimes it lived in a tone of voice, a look, an assumption left unchallenged. Amanda's eyes traveled over Kofi with practiced efficiency, cataloging details like items on a checklist: dark skin, worn sneakers, no visible ID badge, casual hoodie dampened by rain. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she lifted one manicured finger, pointing to a sign mounted near the security turnstiles. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the dismissive set of her jaw. "Deliveries use the back entrance," she said, her voice carrying the rehearsed patience of someone explaining something obvious. "Service corridor is around the corner, off 42nd Street. She tapped her pen against the glossy surface of her desk, the clicking sound punctuating her words. Kofi remained still, his presence calm and measured, despite the dismissal. The subtle weight of his silence filled the space between them before he spoke. "I'm here to meet with leadership," he replied, his voice quiet but clear, carrying the subtle lilt of his Ghanaian accent. Raindrops still clung to the shoulders of his hoodie, catching the light. Amanda's eyebrows arched higher, skepticism etching deeper lines around her mouth. She let out a small, derisive sound, not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to it. "You people always say that," she muttered, just loud enough to be heard, just quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. Her fingers fidgeted with the company logo pin on her lapel. Without taking her eyes off Kofi, she reached for her desk phone, pressing a button with deliberate force. "Security to lobby, please. Immediate assistance required." Her tone suggested urgency, though Kofi had done nothing but stand quietly before her desk. The artificial sweetness in her voice couldn't mask the underlying tension. While they waited, Kofi moved to stand near the wall, his movements unhurried and deliberate. The morning rush was picking up, and employees began streaming through the lobby in greater numbers. Some cast quick glances his way, curious, suspicious, or simply habitual. Others made a point of looking anywhere else, their gazes sliding past him as if he were part of the wall decor. The hum of conversation ebbed and flowed around him like waves. The front desk's phone rang once, its sharp tone cutting through the ambient noise of clicking heels and muted conversations. Amanda didn't move to answer it, her attention fixed firmly on Kofi's presence. Her fingers drummed nervously on the desktop, betraying her outward composure. The phone fell silent, then rang again a few minutes later. Again, she let it ring, apparently deciding that monitoring the supposed threat was more important than her regular duties. The lobby doors swooshed open, admitting two men in tailored suits, their shoes gleaming despite the rain outside. Amanda's demeanor transformed instantly, her face brightening with a genuine smile. The change was striking, like a switch had been flipped inside her. "Good morning, Mr. Davidson, Mr. Chen," she called out, rising slightly from her chair. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Despite the rain. Her laugh tinkled like crystal, nothing like the clipped tones she'd used with Kofi moments before. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her body language open and welcoming. The men nodded in response, barely breaking stride as they swept through the security turnstiles with practiced ease, their badges already in hand. Kofi observed this interaction silently, his expression remaining neutral, though his eyes tracked every detail. His stillness had a quality of patience, of someone gathering information rather than simply waiting. The elevator doors had barely closed behind the executives when security arrived. 2 guards approached, one young and white, his uniform still crisp with newness, his hand hovering near his belt. The other was older, black, his movements more measured, his eyes sharp and observant. His name tag read Luis Martinez. The contrast between them was evident in more than just appearance. It showed in their posture, their approach, their assessment of the situation. Luis's steps slowed as he approached, his eyes moving from Kofi's face to his stance, to the subtle way he held himself. Recognition dawned in his expression, his eyes widening slightly. He stepped forward, moving slightly ahead of his younger colleague, and gave a subtle, respectful nod. Years of experience were evident in the careful way he positioned himself. "Mr. Mensah?" Luis's voice was low, carrying both certainty and a question. There was a depth of understanding in those 2 simple words. The younger guard's confusion was immediate, his hand dropping away from his belt as he looked between Luis and Kofi, trying to understand the shift in dynamics. Behind her desk, Amanda's expression stiffened, the color draining from her face as realization began to set in. Her hand froze mid-motion, a pen suspended in air. Kofi's lips curved into a small, unreadable smile. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried clearly through the now hushed lobby. "I've seen enough." The words hung in the air, simple yet heavy with unspoken meaning. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the front doors. They opened automatically before him, letting in the sound of falling rain. He stepped out into the gray morning, leaving behind a lobby frozen in the weight of what had just transpired. His footsteps were steady, unhurried, a man who had confirmed something he already knew. The glass doors closed behind him with a soft whoosh, separating him from the tableau he'd left behind. Amanda's frozen posture behind her desk, the young guard's confused expression, and Luis's knowing, solemn gaze. The rain began to fall harder, drops catching the light from the lobby windows, creating shifting patterns on the wet sidewalk as Kofi walked away. The imprint of his presence remained, invisible yet undeniable, in the space he had just vacated. The evening shadows lengthened across Kofi's brownstone as he returned home, his clothes still carrying the dampness from the morning's rain. He pulled off his hoodie, letting it drop onto a nearby chair, an uncharacteristically careless gesture for someone usually so precise. The weight of the day's observations hung heavy in the air around him. His bare feet made no sound on the hardwood floors as he moved through the dimly lit space toward his home office. The room, like the rest of his house, spoke of intentional minimalism. A sleek desk of natural wood, a single ergonomic chair, and walls bare except for one framed photograph of his parents standing before their home in Accra. Kofi lowered himself into his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him. His laptop hummed to life with a gentle whir, its blue light casting shadows across his face. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, accessing Halcyon's secure systems through backdoor protocols he'd personally designed. The lobby security footage appeared on his screen in crystal clarity. He leaned back, hands folded in his lap, and watched. The morning's events played out in stark detail. Amanda's immediate dismissal, her assumption about deliveries, the subtle curl of contempt in her lip as she spoke. He noted the exact timestamp when she muttered, "You people." the words now preserved in high-definition video. He watched the parade of employees flowing through the lobby, their reactions cataloged in his mind, the quick, uncomfortable glances, the deliberate aversion of eyes, the studied indifference. Some clutched their bags closer as they passed him. Others quickened their pace slightly. Not one person stopped. Not one person questioned why a man was being treated this way in their lobby. The footage showed the two executives entering, Davidson and Chen, and Amanda's dramatic transformation. Her smile bloomed like a time-lapse flower, her body language shifting from guarded to welcoming in an instant. Kofi paused the video, studying the contrast frame by frame. When he reached the part with Luis, he slowed the playback. The security guard's recognition was even more evident in the footage, the subtle straightening of his posture, the flash of understanding in his eyes, the way he positioned himself protectively between Kofi and his younger colleague. Luis had seen him, truly seen him, without needing the trappings of power or position. Kofi sat back in his chair, letting out a long, measured breath. His hand moved to a drawer in his desk, pulling out a small leather-bound notebook. Inside, written in his precise handwriting, was a series of codes. He entered them into his laptop, accessing a heavily encrypted file labeled Emergency Wind Down Protocols. The document had been created years ago, a contingency plan he'd hoped never to use. It detailed every step needed to dissolve Halcyon Dynamics completely while protecting employees and preventing legal complications. Kofi began editing the protocols, updating numbers, adjusting timelines, ensuring every detail was perfect. His phone lit up with 2 incoming video calls, his lawyer and his accountant, responding to his urgent summons. He accepted both calls, their faces appearing in separate windows on his screen. Both men looked concerned, unused to emergency meetings at this hour. "Initiate it all," Kofi said without preamble, his voice steady and certain. "Everyone gets severance, full benefits. I want no legal mess." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "But it ends. Now." His lawyer leaned forward, worry lines creasing his forehead. "Kofi, are you sure? The company's value is meaningless if it perpetuates what I saw today," Kofi interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Execute the protocols, all of them." Both men nodded, understanding the finality in his voice. The calls ended, leaving Kofi alone in the growing darkness of his office. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low warning of an approaching storm. He opened his email client, creating a new message. The cursor blinked steadily as he typed the subject line. Shutdown directive. The recipients list included every C-suite executive and board member, people who had never questioned why they rarely saw their CEO in person, who had grown comfortable with his distance. The message was brief, each word chosen with deliberate care. Halcyon Dynamics will be permanently dissolved. You will receive full severance. Details to follow. KM. His finger hovered over the send button for just a moment. The clock on his laptop read 9:13 p.m. He pressed send. The message disappeared into cyberspace, racing toward inboxes across the city. Kofi watched the delivery confirmations appear one by one, tiny green check marks signifying the beginning of the end. With methodical movements, he powered down his laptop, the screen going dark. Outside, another roll of thunder sounded, closer now, as storm clouds gathered over Manhattan. The rain that had started this morning was returning, bringing with it a different kind of change than anyone at Halcyon could have anticipated when they'd walked through those lobby doors. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to yesterday's gloom. The pristine lobby of Halcyon Dynamics buzzed with unusual energy as employees rushed in, their phones lighting up with urgent notifications. The normally quiet space filled with whispered conversations and worried glances. In the executive offices upstairs, chaos reigned. Emergency Zoom calls populated screens across the building. Faces of C-suite executives appearing in grid patterns, their expressions ranging from confused to panicked. The CEO's email from the previous night had sparked a firestorm of speculation and fear. "Has anyone actually spoken to Kofi?" demanded Sarah Chen, the CFO, her voice sharp through the speakers. "He's not responding to calls or messages," replied Andre, the CTO, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I've tried his personal number, email, everything." Slack channels erupted with messages, questions, and rumors. Employees shared screenshots of news articles already beginning to circulate about Halcyon's sudden shutdown. HR representatives huddled in conference rooms, preparing scripts for the hundreds of calls they would need to make. Amanda Price strolled through the lobby doors at 9:17 a.m., 17 minutes late, clutching her usual grande caramel macchiato. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way toward her desk, oblivious to the tension in the air. She hadn't checked her work email yet. She never did before getting settled in with her coffee. "Ms. Price?" The voice stopped her mid-stride. Luis Martinez stood near her desk, his security uniform pressed and neat as always. Behind him stood Mark Davidson, the head of human resources, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by something more serious. "We need you to come with us," Davidson said, gesturing toward the elevators. Amanda's forehead creased with confusion. "I just got here. I haven't even logged in yet." "Now please," Davidson insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. They led her to a small conference room on the 3rd floor. The space felt claustrophobic with just 3 chairs and a small table. Davidson sat across from her while Luis positioned himself quietly by the door. "We need to discuss an incident from yesterday," Davidson began, opening a laptop. "Specifically, your interaction with a visitor in the lobby around 10:45 a.m. Amanda set her coffee down, her manicured nails tapping against the cup. "Oh, that?" "I followed protocol. An unidentified person without credentials tried to access the building. I called security, just like we're supposed to." Davidson's expression remained neutral as he turned the laptop toward her. Security footage began to play, showing multiple angles of the lobby. Amanda watched herself on screen, saw her dismissive gesture toward the delivery entrance, heard her own voice clearly through the high-quality audio. "You people always say that." Her stomach dropped. "The visitor you treated this way," Davidson said carefully, "was Kofi Mensah." The color drained from Amanda's face. Her coffee cup trembled slightly in her hand. That's not possible. Kofi Mensah is what, Ms. Price?" She fell silent, her mind racing. Everyone knew Kofi Mensah was the brilliant founder of Halcyon Dynamics, but few had ever seen him. He rarely appeared in photos, never gave interviews. She'd created an image in her head, one that definitely didn't match the man in casual clothes who'd stood in her lobby. "I didn't know who he was," she whispered. "That's precisely the problem," Davidson replied, closing the laptop. "Your actions yesterday demonstrated a clear violation of our security protocols and professional conduct standards. You made assumptions based on appearance, escalated a situation unnecessarily, and used language that violates our zero-tolerance discrimination policy." Amanda's eyes widened. "But I was just doing my job. He didn't have ID. He wasn't dressed like..." "Like what, Ms. Price?" Luis spoke for the first time, his quiet voice carrying unexpected weight. She fell silent again, her hands twisting in her lap. "Your employment is being terminated, effective immediately," Davidson continued. "This decision is final and comes directly from leadership. The reason will be logged as procedural breach and security escalation misuse." "Please," Amanda's voice cracked. "I didn't know. I'll apologize to him personally. I'll take sensitivity training. You can't fire me over one mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," Davidson said firmly. "It was a choice, a series of choices that reflected deeply problematic assumptions. Choices that, as of last night, cost this company its future." Outside the conference room, phones rang constantly as news of Halcyon's shutdown spread. The PR team huddled in their office, crafting careful statements about strategic restructuring and financial headwinds. But through the company's internal channels, the real story spread like wildfire. Their founder had witnessed 45 seconds of casual discrimination and decided to end it all. Amanda's pleas fell on deaf ears. Within an hour, she stood in front of her desk, placing personal items into a cardboard box. Her hands shook as she unpinned photos from her cubicle wall, dropped her world's best secretary mug into the box. Her coffee sat forgotten, gone cold. Security escorted her to the lobby. Through the glass doors, she could see reporters gathering, their cameras ready. Someone had leaked the story. Headlines already screamed across tech blogs. Halcyon Dynamics dissolves overnight. Tech giant's mysterious shutdown. Sources claim founder's decision linked to discrimination incident. Amanda pushed through the doors, clutching her box close to her chest. Camera flashes burst around her as reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Price, is it true you were fired for discriminating against Kofi Mensah? Did you know who he was when you called security? Do you have any comment on Halcyon's shutdown?" She kept her head down, walking faster, her heels unsteady on the sidewalk. Across the street, Louis stood watching, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. As she passed, he gave her a single, subtle nod, not of sympathy, but of acknowledgement. A quiet recognition of consequences, finally catching up to casual cruelty. Amanda didn't look back. She couldn't. The weight of her box, filled with 5 years of desk trinkets and false assumptions, felt heavier with each step. The morning sun streamed through Andre's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across his modern condo. He sat at his desk, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his usually neat appearance disheveled from hours of sleepless worry. His monitor glowed with an endless stream of unread emails, their subject lines growing increasingly urgent. Urgent. Investor call required. Press statement needed. Team seeking answers. Please respond ASAP. Andre's fingers hovered over his keyboard, but he couldn't bring himself to type. What could he possibly say? The company he'd helped build for the past 7 years had vanished overnight, and he had no more answers than anyone else. His phone buzzed again, the 20th time in the past hour. Another message from Sarah, the CFO, demanding information. Andre ignored it, just like all the others. His eyes kept returning to his private messaging app where his last exchange with Kofi remained unanswered. Got your message about dropping by. Everything okay? Read 10:23 a.m. 2 days ago. The question that had been gnawing at him since that night surfaced again. Why didn't Kofi warn him? They'd worked side by side for years, building Halcyon's infrastructure from the ground up. Kofi had been more than just a boss. He'd been a mentor, a friend. They'd shared countless late nights debugging code, reimagining what ethical AI could look like, dreaming of technology that could truly serve humanity. Andre pulled up their old project files, scrolling through years of collaborative work. Each line of code held memories. Kofi's patient explanations, his quiet encouragement, his unwavering belief in Andre's potential. You see patterns others miss, Kofi had told him once. That's rare. Use it wisely. Had he? Had he really seen everything he should have? The doorbell's chime startled him from his thoughts. Andre checked his security camera feed. A courier stood at his door, holding a small package. He hadn't ordered anything. When he opened the door, the courier handed him a simple manila envelope. Delivery for Andre Blake, she said, already turning to leave. No signature required. The envelope had no return address, just his name written in familiar, precise handwriting. Andre's heart jumped. He'd recognize Kofi's penmanship anywhere. Back at his desk, Andre carefully opened the envelope. Inside, he found a single sheet of cream-colored paper and a small flash drive. The note was brief, written in Kofi's characteristic style. Economical with words, heavy with meaning. You were always the best part of it. But if even you didn't see the rot, I failed in ways deeper than code. K. Andre's hands trembled slightly as he plugged in the flash drive. A folder appeared on his screen containing hundreds of files. As he began opening them, his throat tightened. Internal bias reports spanning years. Anonymous staff complaints. Exit interviews filled with carefully worded grievances. Detailed documentation of incidents that had been quietly resolved. Email threads showing HR discussions that never led to action. Statistics showing patterns of promotion and advancement that clearly favored certain demographics. Hours passed as Andre read through file after file. The sun moved across the sky, shadows shifting in his quiet condo. Each document revealed another crack in the foundation of what he'd thought was a progressive, ethical company. Patterns emerged, subtle discriminations, casual exclusions, problems raised and then buried under bureaucracy. His own name appeared occasionally in these reports, always in a positive light. Andre Blake demonstrates exceptional leadership. Technical decisions under Blake's guidance remained sound. But there were other comments too, ones he'd never seen. Raised concerns to Blake about team dynamics, no follow-up received. Attempted to discuss cultural issues with CTO, was told to focus on technical deliverables. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just been blindsided by Kofi's decision, he'd been complicit in creating the conditions that made it necessary. How many times had he heard snippets of conversations and looked away? How often had he told himself it wasn't his place to intervene, that he needed to stay focused on the technology? Andre stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back against the wall. He walked to his filing cabinet and pulled out his copy of Halcyon's non-disclosure agreement. The thick document represented years of secrets, innovations, and now, he realized, silence in the face of systemic problems. Standing in his living room, he held the flash drive in one hand and the NDA in the other. The weight of both felt enormous. The NDA represented safety, security, the protection of his reputation and career. The flash drive held truth, uncomfortable, damning truth. Andre walked to his kitchen sink. From a drawer, he pulled out a lighter. His hand was steady now as he held the flame to the corner of the NDA. The paper caught quickly, curling and blackening. He was right, Andre whispered, watching the document burn. We built something that didn't deserve to survive. The paper crumbled to ash in his sink, carried away by the running water. The flash drive felt heavier now, a weight of responsibility rather than guilt. 2 weeks after Halcyon's dissolution, rain pattered against the windows of a modest meeting room in a Harlem community center. The space was intentionally chosen, far from the gleaming tech corridors of Manhattan, nestled instead in the heart of a community that Silicon Valley had long ignored. The gentle drumming of raindrops created a soothing backdrop to the momentous gathering taking place inside. Kofi sat at a simple wooden table, his presence both commanding and welcoming. Gone was the old hoodie. He wore a crisp black button-down shirt with traditional kente cloth accents that honored his Ghanaian heritage. Around him gathered 12 individuals, each chosen with careful purpose, their diverse faces reflecting the vision he held for the future. Dr. Maya Chen, an AI ethicist who'd been blacklisted for exposing bias in facial recognition systems, sat to his left. Her keen eyes missed nothing, and her notebook was already filled with precise, detailed notes. Besides her was James Thompson, a former security engineer who'd been fired for reporting discriminatory hiring practices, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against his coffee mug. Across the table, Aisha Williams, a community organizer known for her work in tech education for underserved youth, studied her notebook intently, occasionally glancing up to take in the room with quiet determination. The room held an electric energy, the kind that preceded moments of profound change. Laptops were open, but screens remained dark. Papers rustled softly. Someone's coffee cup clinked against the table. The air itself seemed charged with possibility, with the promise of something new being born. For the first time in 2 weeks, Kofi broke his silence. His voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the room, commanding attention without demanding it. "We start clean," he said, each word measured and deliberate. No investor-driven metrics, no talent gatekeeping. His eyes met each person's gaze in turn, connecting with them individually, acknowledging their worth. "We build for those shut out." The room remained silent, but heads nodded in understanding and agreement. These were people who understood firsthand the cost of exclusion, who'd seen their brilliance dismissed because they didn't fit someone else's image of success. Each person carried their own story of doors closed and opportunities denied. As morning turned to afternoon, plans began taking shape on whiteboards and shared documents. Ideas flowed freely in this space where everyone's voice held equal weight. Kofi moved to the front of the room, marker in hand, drawing organizational structures that looked more like interconnected webs than traditional hierarchies. His movements were fluid and purposeful, mapping out a new future with each stroke. "Motsi," he wrote in bold letters at the top of the board. Below it, he sketched out a new kind of company architecture, one built from the ground up to prevent the very problems that had poisoned Halcyon. The name stood proudly at the center of his vision, a beacon for what was to come. "Transparent salaries," he explained, writing numbers that made several people's eyes widen in surprise and approval. "Posted publicly, determined by clear metrics, not negotiation skills or unconscious bias." He drew lines connecting different roles, showing how experience and impact would be measured objectively. No more hidden advantages, no more pay gaps based on anything but the work itself. Dr. Chen raised her hand, her expression thoughtful but concerned. "The traditional VCs won't like this structure," she said. "They'll push back. They always do when their power is challenged." Kofi's smile held a hint of steel, a glimpse of the resolve that had carried him through years of struggle. "We're not taking traditional VC money. The seed funding is mine, earnings from Halcyon's dissolution. After that, we build community ownership models." His voice carried absolute certainty, leaving no room for doubt. He moved to a fresh section of whiteboard, drawing a map with confident strokes. "We open offices in Atlanta, Detroit, Lagos, and São Paulo. Not satellite offices, equal headquarters, each with full autonomy and direct access to resources." His finger traced the connections between these global points, creating a network that spanned continents and cultures. James leaned forward, his cybersecurity background evident in his next question. "How do we prevent the same biases from creeping in during hiring? Systems have a way of reproducing old patterns, even with the best intentions." This was where Kofi's expression changed. Subtle, but noticeable. A flash of something deeper, more personal. He put down the marker and pulled up a series of code snippets on the main screen. "We turn the tables," he said. "We build recruitment algorithms that detect and correct bias. Reverse engineered from what happened to me." The code scrolled by, elegant in its complexity, beautiful in its purpose. Understanding dawned on faces around the room. Kofi continued, "The software will analyze surveillance footage, behavioral indicators, interaction patterns. It will flag not just explicit bias, but the subtle dismissals, the microaggressions, the patterns of exclusion." His voice remained calm, but there was power behind each word, the power of someone who had found a way to transform pain into purpose. He played a clip from Halcyon's lobby, the interaction with Amanda, seen from multiple angles. The AI overlay highlighted body language, tone patterns, facial micro-expressions, exposing what had always been hidden in plain sight. "If the world wants to judge by skin and clothes," he said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity, "let's show them what that reveals." The room fell silent as they watched bias made visible, quantifiable, undeniable. Aisha stood up, moving to the whiteboard with newfound energy. "We can use this for training too," she said, sketching out educational modules with quick, confident strokes. "Show people their own biases in real time. Make the invisible visible. Create a mirror that doesn't lie." Her excitement was contagious, sparking nods and murmurs of agreement. The energy in the room shifted from planning to possibility. Ideas flowed faster, building upon each other like a rising tide. Someone suggested incorporating community feedback loops into the AI's learning models. Another proposed transparency reports that would show bias detection patterns across industries. Voices that might have been silenced elsewhere found strength here, each contribution valued and explored. As afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting golden patterns across the room, the whiteboards had filled with diagrams, code snippets, and implementation plans. The simple meeting room had become an incubator for something revolutionary, not just another tech company, but a systematic dismantling of Silicon Valley's exclusionary practices. The birth of a new paradigm written in markers and shared dreams. A young developer in the back, who'd been quiet most of the day, raised her hand hesitantly. "What's the name mean?" she asked. "Motzi?" Her question cut through the buzz of conversation, bringing focus back to the heart of their purpose. Kofi stood at the front of the room, his posture relaxed but purposeful. The late afternoon light caught the golden threads in his kente cloth, making them shine. "Motzi means one in Twi," he explained, his voice carrying the warmth of his heritage. "One people, one standard." His gaze swept across the room, taking in the diverse faces that represented the future he envisioned, each person now part of something larger than themselves. "And this time," he added, with quiet certainty that filled the room, "they'll know my face." Amanda Price sat in her small studio apartment, staring at the dwindling balance in her checking account. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across her desk, where rejection emails filled her inbox like digital tombstones. Her severance from Halcyon had barely covered 2 months' rent in her Manhattan apartment, and the steady stream of "thank you for your interest" messages was becoming a cruel rhythm to her days. She clicked through another job board, her manicured nails tapping against the keyboard with increasing frustration. Each application felt like shouting into a void. Companies that had once responded to her messages within hours now left her on red. LinkedIn connections who used to like every status update had quietly unfollowed her. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years being the gatekeeper, and now every gate was firmly closed. Her phone buzzed with another rejection, this one from a small tech startup in Brooklyn. "While your experience is impressive," she didn't bother reading the rest. The isolation was perhaps the worst part. Her Instagram followers had dropped by half. Brunch invites stopped coming. Even her doorman seemed to look at her differently, though she told herself she was being paranoid. The story had spread through the tech community like wildfire. The receptionist who brought down $1 billion company. That evening, sitting at a dimly lit bar in the Lower East Side, Amanda nursed her third gin and tonic. Across from her, Sarah, a former colleague from her first job out of college, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The happy hour crowd around them provided a buffer of white noise. "I didn't do anything wrong," Amanda said, her voice rising slightly. "I was just doing my job. Following protocol. He didn't have an appointment, didn't have an ID badge." She took another sip, ice clinking against glass. Sarah traced the rim of her wine glass, choosing her words carefully. "You didn't even ask his name, Amanda." "I wasn't racist," Amanda snapped, causing a few nearby heads to turn. Her cheeks flushed, partly from alcohol, partly from anger. "He looked like a delivery guy. The hoodie, the sneakers. What was I supposed to think?" Sarah's expression tightened. "Maybe that's the problem right there," she said quietly, reaching for her purse. "Listen, I should go. Early meeting tomorrow." Amanda watched her friend leave, adding another name to the growing list of people who couldn't handle the truth, at least her version of it. She paid her tab and walked home, the city's evening bustle feeling more hostile than usual. Back in her apartment, Amanda kicked off her heels and opened her laptop. The screen's blue light illuminated her face as she typed Kofi Mensa into Google. The results were frustratingly sparse. A few old conference mentions, some patent filings, but only one photo. It was grainy, taken years ago at some tech event where he stood in the background. But then new articles caught her eye. Headlines about Motzi, a mysterious new company rising from Halcyon's ashes. Revolutionary approach to tech equity, one read. Anonymous founder disrupts Silicon Valley model, declared another. She clicked through, reading about their unique structure, their commitment to diversity, their rejection of traditional venture capital. Her cursor hovered over a careers link. The company was hiring, aggressively, positions at all levels, across multiple cities. Amanda's heart rate quickened. This could be it, her chance to prove she'd learned, to make things right, maybe even a fresh start. The application page was surprisingly minimal. Clean design, simple forms, no lengthy questionnaires or personality tests. She uploaded her resume, carefully crafted to emphasize her people skills and community building experience. Her finger hesitated over the submit button for just a moment before pressing it. The response was instant. A red box appeared on her screen. Application declined. You do not meet equity compliance standards. Her breath caught in her throat. This had to be a mistake. She opened a new browser, cleared her cookies, created a fresh email address. This time she changed her name to Amanda Patterson, tweaked some details in her resume. Submit. Wait. Another red box. Application blocked. Multiple submission attempts detected. Amanda's hands began to shake. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through old contacts until she found Jenny's number. Jenny had been a mid-level manager at Halcyon, one of the few who'd landed on her feet at Motzi. They hadn't spoken since everything happened, but maybe. "Did you see my resume?" Amanda typed, trying to keep her message casual. Minutes passed. Then, it never passed the filter. Amanda stared at those 5 words, horror creeping up her spine like ice water. The pieces clicked into place. The instant rejections, the detection of her second attempt, the equity compliance standards. They had built a system specifically designed to identify people like her. People who carried bias like a hidden weapon, who judged books by their covers and humans by their hoodies. Her phone slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering onto her desk. The city lights outside her window blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. For the first time, she truly understood what she'd done, not just to Kofi Mensa on that rainy morning, but to countless others before him. And now an AI could see right through her, could spot the prejudice she'd spent years denying. The autumn sun painted Brooklyn's skyline in warm hues as crowds gathered outside Motzi's newly unveiled headquarters. The building itself made a statement, a harmonious blend of West African architectural elements and modern design, with solar panels that caught the light like diamonds. Unlike the cold glass towers of Manhattan, this structure felt alive, welcoming, human. Inside the main auditorium, excitement buzzed through the air. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, where Dr. Maya Thompson stood confidently in her crisp white lab coat, her natural curls framing a face bright with purpose. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the Motzi logo, a simple, elegant design inspired by Adinkra symbols. "Welcome to a new chapter in tech history," Maya began, her voice carrying through the packed room and to thousands watching the live stream. "Today, we're not just launching a product. We're introducing accountability made visible." She gestured, and the screen behind her transformed, displaying the word Clarion in clean, bold letters. "Clarion is more than an AI system," Maya continued, moving across the stage with practiced ease. It's the culmination of decades of lived experience translated into code. Every microaggression, every subtle dismissal, every moment of being overlooked. We've taught our AI to see what society trained itself to ignore. The presentation shifted to real-world examples. Security footage from various workplaces played, with Clarion's interface highlighting patterns of behavior. Who got interrupted in meetings, which resumes were dismissed without reading, how customer service interactions changed based on names and appearances. The audience leaned forward, recognition dawning on many faces. Clarion doesn't punish, Maya explained, her voice growing stronger. It reveals. It holds up a mirror to our actions, turning subjective experience into undeniable data. No more gaslighting. No more, "I didn't mean it that way." The patterns speak for themselves. In the private balcony above, hidden from the crowd's view, Kofi Mensah stood perfectly still, his hands resting lightly on the railing. He watched as Maya demonstrated Clarion's capabilities, showing how it could be implemented in hiring processes, performance reviews, customer service interactions, even courtroom proceedings. The system was elegant, impartial, and impossible to ignore. His eyes swept across the audience, taking in details that would have been unthinkable in his early tech days. A row of young women in hijabs, their fingers flying across laptops as they took notes. A group of black women with various natural hairstyles, nodding in recognition at Maya's words. Near the front, an engineer rocked gently in his seat, his hands moving in subtle stims, completely at ease, no one giving him strange looks or asking him to sit still. These were the faces he'd dreamed of seeing 15 years ago, when he was the only black face in investor meetings, forcing himself to speak differently, dress differently, be different. Now, looking down at this crowd, he saw people being completely, unapologetically themselves. A young man with vitiligo asked a technical question about Clarion's neural networks, his voice confident and clear. A woman in a wheelchair challenged Maya on accessibility features, sparking an engaged discussion about universal design principles. The questions were sharp, technical, human, and no one was performing or hiding or trying to make others comfortable with their presence. Kofi pulled out his phone, opening a blank document. For years, he'd let his work speak for him, staying in the shadows while Halcyon grew. But watching this room full of unleashed talent, seeing the future he'd sacrificed everything to build, he knew it was time for his voice to join theirs. His fingers moved across the screen, typing out words he'd held back for too long. I built Halcyon to prove we belonged in tech. I built Motzi because we never needed to prove anything at all. The talent was always here, in the neighborhoods Silicon Valley ignored, in the schools they wouldn't recruit from, in the faces they couldn't see past their own biases to recognize. Clarion isn't just code. It's truth made visible. It's every moment of being dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated, transformed into data no one can deny. It's the mirror we're holding up to a world that claimed it couldn't see its own reflection. I walked away from a billion-dollar company because its success was built on the same broken foundation as every other tower in tech. Motzi isn't built on sand. It's built on us, our experiences, our resilience, our unwavering knowledge of our own worth. The future of tech isn't about making space at someone else's table. It's about building our own house, with room for everyone who was ever told they didn't belong. As he finished typing, Maya's presentation reached its crescendo. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, the energy electric with possibility. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, as if nature itself was celebrating this moment of transformation. That evening, as the crowds dispersed and the cleaning crew moved through the auditorium, a small Black-owned tech magazine published their exclusive interview. The article spread across social media like wildfire, Kofi's words and image finally matching the impact he'd had on the industry. The photo accompanying the piece showed him as he was. No suit, no pretense, just a brilliant mind who'd chosen to tear down what he'd built so something true could grow in its place. The headline captured the essence of his journey: "The billionaire who watched and walked away." In the article's final paragraphs, Kofi's words rang with quiet power. "We didn't lose a company. We lost our silence. Motsi isn't a second chance. It's the only chance that ever mattered." As readers shared and commented on the article, Kofi's face, previously known only to a select few, became a symbol of something larger than one man or one company. It became the face of transformation, of refusing to accept less than what was right, of building something new instead of trying to fix what was fundamentally broken. The morning after Motsi's historic launch, Andre Blake walked slowly through Brooklyn's tree-lined streets, his footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. In his hands, he held a crisp printout of Motsi's manifesto, its pages already worn from repeated reading. The autumn wind rustled the papers, but his grip remained firm. He paused at a small park, settling onto a bench that faced the direction of Motsi's new headquarters, though the building wasn't visible from here. The manifesto's words seemed to leap off the page. "We build for those shut out." Each time he read it, the weight of his own silence at Halcyon pressed heavier on his shoulders. Andre pulled out his phone, scrolling through news coverage of yesterday's launch. The images showed a vibrant, diverse crowd of tech professionals, exactly the kind of talent he'd always known existed, but had never fought hard enough to include. He saw the excitement in their faces, the relief of finally being seen, and felt a deep ache of recognition. In his apartment, dozens of job offers sat unanswered in his inbox. Top tech companies, venture capital firms, startups, all eager to snap up Halcyon's former CTO. But their carefully worded emails rang hollow now. They were offering him the same old world, just with different logos. Opening his email, Andre started a new message to the only address that mattered. The cursor blinked for several minutes before he typed to k.mensh@motsi.com. Subject: request to speak. No agenda. He didn't add anything else. There was too much to say for email, and not enough words to say it right. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Hours passed. Andre walked through his neighborhood, past coffee shops and boutiques, his phone heavy in his pocket. When it finally buzzed, the message was characteristically brief. Ethiopian Corner, Harlem, 7 p.m. The cafe was tucked away on a quiet street, its windows glowing warmly in the evening darkness. Inside, the rich aroma of roasting coffee beans filled the air, and soft Ethiopian jazz played through hidden speakers. Kofi sat at a corner table, dressed simply in a black sweater and jeans, looking as composed as ever. Andre approached slowly, noting how Kofi didn't rise or reach out to shake hands. They hadn't seen each other since before Halcyon's dissolution. As Andre settled into his chair, a server brought 2 cups of traditional Ethiopian coffee without being asked. Kofi had clearly been here before. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the gentle clink of cups against saucers. Andre knew Kofi wouldn't speak first. That wasn't his way. He never filled silence for comfort's sake. "I saw the launch yesterday," Andre finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "What you've built. It's everything tech should have been from the start." Kofi took a slow sip of coffee, his expression neutral but attentive. "I keep thinking about Halcyon," Andre continued, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "About all the signs I ignored. The complaints I dismissed as not my department. The meetings where I saw people being talked over but told myself it wasn't my place to intervene." He met Kofi's gaze directly. "I thought if I didn't participate in the discrimination, if I just focused on the code and kept my head down, I wasn't responsible. You were one of the few who could have made them listen," Kofi replied, his voice carrying no anger, just quiet certainty. "That was the point." Andre nodded, accepting the truth of it. I know. I told myself I was protecting my position so I could help others up the ladder later. But there was always some reason to wait, some excuse to stay quiet. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I became what I promised myself I'd never be, someone who made it and pulled the ladder up behind them. Kofi set his cup down carefully, considering Andre's words. Then he leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. Motsi isn't about guilt, he said. It's about repair. If you still want to build, there's a role. If the team accepts you. Andre's breath caught. He hadn't dared hope for this possibility. The team decides. Everything here is different, Kofi explained. No hierarchies based on past titles, no special treatment for industry names. You'd start fresh, like everyone else. Your code will speak for itself, and your actions will matter more than your intentions. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, the weight between them shifting from past regret to future possibility. As they stood to leave, Kofi handed Andre a card with an address and time. Tomorrow morning, come ready to learn as much as to teach. The next day, Andre stood outside Motsi's headquarters, taking in its innovative design. The building seemed to embody its mission, welcoming but groundbreaking, respectful of tradition while pushing toward the future. Inside, the lobby was alive with activity. Engineers gathered around standing desks, engaged in animated discussions. A woman in a wheelchair led what appeared to be a product meeting, her team members scattered on comfortable couches with laptops balanced on knees. The space hummed with purpose and possibility. The receptionist looked up as Andre approached, offering a warm, professional smile. Good morning. How can I help you? No assumptions, no judgment, just simple human courtesy. Andre felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. I'm Andre Blake, he said. I have an appointment for the engineering team interview. Of course, she nodded, tapping at her tablet. Please have a seat. Someone will be down shortly to show you to the meeting room. Andre settled into one of the lobby's comfortable chairs, watching the flow of people around him. No one treated him like a former CTO or a fallen tech star. He was just another person coming to contribute his skills, to be evaluated on his current actions rather than his past titles or failures. For the first time since Halcyon's collapse, his breathing came easier. The air itself felt different here, clearer, more real. He wasn't being asked to forget his past or deny his mistakes. Instead, he was being offered the chance to learn from them, to build something better. A young engineer appeared, tablet in hand. Mr. Blake, we're ready for you upstairs. She smiled, gesturing toward the elevators. Welcome to Motsi. The Motsi Tech Lab hummed with anticipation as developers and engineers gathered around a horseshoe of curved monitors. The space was modern but comfortable, with plants dotting the workspace and natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. At the center stood Dr. Maya Chen, Motsi's head of AI ethics, her hands steady on the keyboard as she prepared to demonstrate Clarion. Kofi leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching silently. He'd insisted on being present for every major test, but preferred to observe rather than lead. His presence carried weight without words. Okay, let's start with the baseline scenarios, Dr. Chen announced, pulling up a series of pre-recorded mock job interviews. The footage showed actors playing both interviewer and candidate roles, with subtle biases deliberately woven into their interactions. Clarion's interface appeared as a translucent overlay on the video feed. Numbers and metrics scrolled along the edges while the AI tracked facial expressions, body language, and vocal patterns in real time. Watch this interaction, Dr. Chen said, pointing to a particular sequence. The mock interviewer, a middle-aged white man, was speaking to a young, black female candidate. Clarion highlighted a slight narrowing of the interviewer's eyes, a barely perceptible lean backward, a millisecond delay in his responses. The system is detecting multiple microaggressions, explained Raj Patel, one of the lead developers. See how it's mapping the interviewer's unconscious physical responses? Those subtle shifts in body language that most people wouldn't consciously register. The team watched as Clarion assigned percentage values to each detected behavior. A slight change in vocal tone when discussing the candidate's qualifications. 87% probability of implicit bias. A pattern of interruptions, 92% correlation with gender-based dismissiveness. But here's where it gets interesting, Dr. Chen continued, switching to another test case. Clarion doesn't just flag individual actions. It identifies systemic patterns across multiple interactions. The monitors displayed a grid of simultaneous interviews. Clarion drew connecting lines between similar behaviors, building a web of related biases. The AI wasn't just spotting isolated incidents, it was mapping the architecture of discrimination itself. From his corner, Kofi straightened slightly. This was what he'd envisioned. Technology that could make visible what so many had suffered in silence. Then someone spoke up, a junior developer named James. "I have something we should try." He hesitated, glancing at Kofi. "I still have access to some of the Halcyon security archives, including the lobby footage from that day." The room grew quiet. Everyone knew what footage he meant. Kofi nodded once. "Do it." James connected his laptop to the main system and pulled up the video. The familiar scene played out. Amanda at the reception desk, Kofi entering in his hoodie, the entire interaction that had led to Halcyon's dissolution. Clarion's analysis began immediately. Red highlights appeared around Amanda's face as she spoke, tracking her expressions, her posture, her tone. Numbers climbed rapidly on the side of the screen. 98% confidence of active bias, Dr. Chen read aloud. The system is picking up multiple layers, prejudgment based on appearance, dismissive tone patterns, aggressive escalation without cause. But then Clarion did something unexpected. It began flagging other people in the footage, the employees walking past, the ones who averted their eyes, those who saw but said nothing. "Bystander complicity," Raj explained, his voice soft. "The AI is identifying passive participation in discriminatory behavior." The team watched in silence as Clarion mapped out an entire ecosystem of bias, from Amanda's active discrimination to the quiet enabling of everyone around her. The system wasn't just measuring individual actions. It was revealing how bias survived through collective silence. "This raises serious questions, Doctor," Chen said, turning to face the group. "We've built something that can detect bias with unprecedented accuracy. But how do we deploy it? Where do we draw the lines?" The discussion that followed was intense. Some argued for immediate widespread deployment in companies, schools, courtrooms. Others raised concerns about privacy, about the risk of the technology being misused. "What if companies use it to create new forms of discrimination?" one engineer asked. "What if it becomes another way to exclude people?" "Or what if it goes too far?" another added. "Are we going to start punishing people for unconscious behaviors they might not even be aware of?" Kofi pushed off from the wall and stepped forward. The room fell silent as he approached the central display, studying the frozen image of his younger self standing in that lobby. "We're not just punishing people," he said quietly but firmly. "We're correcting systems. Clarion doesn't cancel, it reveals." He turned to face the team. The goal isn't to catch individuals. It's to make patterns undeniable, to show what's always been there but was too easy to ignore. The team absorbed his words, understanding dawning on their faces. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about illumination. "Push it live," Kofi said simply. Dr. Chen nodded and began the deployment sequence. Lines of code scrolled across the screens as Clarion went online, its neural networks beginning to process real-world data for the first time. That evening, as the sun set over Brooklyn, Kofi sat in his office reviewing the initial deployment metrics. His phone buzzed with a message from Professor Queasy, his old mentor from the University of Ghana's computer science department. The message was simple, but carried the weight of years. What you are doing, we prayed for this in silence. Now the silence is broken. Kofi looked out his window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Somewhere out there, Clarion was watching, learning, revealing. The silence wasn't just broken, it was being transformed into undeniable data, into truth that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Amanda's fingers trembled as she adjusted her blouse collar, sitting at her cramped desk in the windowless office of Bergen Logistics. The temp job barely covered her rent, and her savings were dwindling fast. Each morning felt like a reminder of how far she'd fallen since that day at Halcyon. Her phone buzzed, displaying blocked number. Usually she ignored these calls, but desperation made her answer. "Hello, is this Amanda Price?" The voice was crisp, professional. "Yes, speaking. I'm calling from Project One. We're a new technology firm, and your resume caught our attention. Would you be interested in interviewing for an executive assistant position?" Amanda's heart raced. Executive assistant, that was more her speed, closer to what she used to do. "Yes, absolutely. What can you tell me about the company?" "We're in stealth mode right now, but I can send you the address and time if you're available tomorrow at 2 p.m. She agreed quickly, jotting down the address in downtown Brooklyn. After hanging up, she immediately opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she searched for Project One Company. Nothing relevant appeared. LinkedIn turned up blank. Even industry news sites had no mention of it. Strange, she thought. But startups were often secretive, and beggars couldn't be choosers. The next day, Amanda stood outside a sleek glass building, double-checking the address on her phone. Her stomach dropped as she recognized the distinctive architecture. This was Motzi's headquarters. She'd seen it in news coverage, though she'd actively avoided reading about Kofi Mensah's new venture. For a moment, she considered turning around, but the thought of returning to her temp desk, of another month scraping by, made her square her shoulders and push through the revolving door. The lobby was nothing like Halcyon's, warm woods mixed with glass and steel. The receptionist, a young man with vitiligo, smiled genuinely as she approached. "Amanda Price, for Project One." He nodded at her hesitation. "Fourth floor, interview room 4. The elevator will take you directly there." The elevator rode smoothly upward. Amanda's reflection in the polished doors showed a woman trying too hard to look confident. Her suit, once perfectly tailored, hung slightly loose after months of stress-induced weight loss. Interview room 4 was unlike any interview space she'd seen before. Just a single chair faced a large screen mounted on the wall. A small camera blinked above it. The door clicked shut behind her. "Please, have a seat." A neutral voice came through hidden speakers. Amanda sat, smoothing her skirt with sweaty palms. "Ms. Price," the voice continued, "please explain why you believe you were previously denied employment at Motzi." Her chest tightened. So this wasn't a real interview. Of course it wasn't. She should have known. There must have been some mistake," she began, her voice higher than usual. "I was stressed that day at Halcyon. It was a busy morning, and I was just following security protocols." The screen remained dark. The voice said nothing. "Look," Amanda continued, words tumbling out faster now. "Mr. Mensah didn't look like a CEO. He was wearing old clothes, no ID badge. Anyone would have made the same assumption. And then suddenly my whole career was ruined because of reverse discrimination." The screen flickered to life. On the left side, security footage showed her encounter with Kofi at Halcyon's lobby. On the right, a live feed of her current interview appeared. Colored lines and data points began overlaying both videos. Amanda watched in horror as her past self dismissed Kofi, the system highlighting her subtle facial expressions, her dismissive tone, the way she'd immediately reached for the security phone without asking his name. Beside it, her present self showed similar patterns as she tried to justify her actions. Numbers and analyses scrolled alongside the footage. Bias confidence, 98%. Historical. Defensive rationalization, 94%. Current. Unconscious prejudice, markers, multiple. Self-awareness level, critical low. The door opened quietly behind her. Amanda didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could see Kofi's reflection in the screen, still in casual clothes, still quietly confident. "I didn't invite you here for a job," he said softly. "I invited you for a final mirror." His footsteps retreated. The door closed again. Amanda sat frozen, forced to watch herself in stereo, past and present, both versions of her revealing biases she'd refused to acknowledge. The data didn't lie. The patterns were undeniable. Every microaggression, every assumption, every moment of privilege was now quantified in cold, hard numbers. The room remained silent except for the soft hum of the screen. Her own words echoed in her head. "He didn't look like a CEO." The footage played on loop, forcing her to confront what she'd been running from all these months. The auditorium of the Global Technology Ethics Summit buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of tech leaders, journalists, and innovators filled the seats, their attention fixed on the panel of distinguished speakers. Under the warm stage lights, Kofi Mensah sat quietly among them, his presence commanding yet understated in a simple black turtleneck and tailored blazer. His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the nervous energy that filled the room. The moderator, a respected tech journalist from The Atlantic, leaned forward in her chair, adjusting her glasses as she prepared to ask the question everyone was waiting for. "Mr. Mensah, your company Motzi has revolutionized how we think about ethical AI and workplace culture, but many still wonder about Halcyon's sudden closure. What made you walk away from $600 million? The audience fell silent. You could hear a pin drop as cameras clicked and phones recorded. Kofi adjusted his microphone, his expression thoughtful, fingers lightly tapping the armrest before becoming still. "The moment I realized my presence was more threatening than my absence." A murmur rippled through the crowd like a wave. Several people exchanged glances, eyebrows raised. The moderator paused, letting the weight of his words settle before she ventured further. "Could you elaborate on that?" Kofi nodded slowly, his hands clasped in his lap. His wedding ring caught the light as he shifted slightly in his seat. "It was a Tuesday morning," he began, his voice rich and measured. "I'd received reports about cultural issues at Halcyon. Subtle discrimination, microaggressions. Nothing overtly illegal, just the kind of daily paper cuts that eventually make you bleed out." The cameras zoomed in on his face as he continued, capturing the subtle emotions that crossed his features. "I decided to visit our Manhattan office unannounced. No suit, no fanfare. Just a man in a hoodie walking into the building he owned." The audience leaned forward collectively as Kofi described the lobby scene. Amanda's dismissive treatment, the immediate security call, the averted gazes of passing employees. His voice remained measured, but carried an undercurrent of carefully controlled emotion that resonated with everyone listening. The security guard who arrived, Luis Martinez, he recognized me immediately. But what struck me wasn't just the receptionist's behavior. It was everyone else's silence. Dozens of people watched a black man being treated like a threat, and not one person questioned it. Not one voice spoke up. Social media feeds exploded in real time. Kofi Mensah began trending within minutes. Journalists in the audience typed furiously on their laptops, their faces illuminated by blue screen light. I went home that evening and watched the security footage, every second, every interaction, and I realized something profound. Halcyon wasn't just failing to be inclusive. It was actively preserving exclusion through silence, through looking the other way, through the collective shrug that says, "Not my problem." He paused, taking a sip of water, his throat working as he swallowed. The $600 million wasn't the point. Money doesn't fix systems built on broken foundations. Sometimes you have to tear it all down to build something true, something honest. The moderator interjected softly, her voice gentle but probing. Some called it an overreaction to one incident. Kofi's eyes flickered with intensity, a brief flash of fire that was quickly contained. It wasn't one incident. It was thousands of incidents, happening every day, in every office, to countless people who didn't have the power to walk away. I just happened to be the one who could make it visible, who could shine a light on what others endure silently. In a modest apartment in Brooklyn, Luis Martinez sat in his worn leather recliner, the cushions shaped to his body after years of use. He watched the broadcast on his small TV, the colors slightly faded. His granddaughter perched on the armrest, her textbooks forgotten on the coffee table, both of them transfixed by Kofi's words. "That's you he's talking about, abuelo," she whispered, squeezing his shoulder with pride shining in her eyes. Luis nodded, remembering that rain-soaked morning as clearly as if it were yesterday. He'd recognized Kofi instantly, not from photos, but from something in his bearing, the quiet dignity that no hoodie could hide. While others saw a threat, Luis had seen truth. His phone buzzed on the side table, lighting up the dimly lit room. An email notification appeared. From KMENSAH@motsi.com. Subject: Head of Security and Inclusion Systems, all branches. Priority: high. Luis's hands trembled slightly as he opened the message, his weathered fingers tapping the screen carefully. The offer was comprehensive, not just security oversight, but a leadership role in implementing MOTSI's ethical AI systems across all global locations. The salary made his eyes widen, nearly triple what he'd been making at Halcyon. A personal note from Kofi followed, the words simple but powerful. "You saw me when others chose not to look. Now I need you to help others be seen." KM. The next morning, Luis walked through MOTSI's entrance, his new access card hanging proudly around his neck. He'd polished his shoes and wore his best suit, the one usually reserved for church. The lobby erupted in applause. Engineers, developers, and staff members lined the atrium, welcoming him with genuine warmth and smiles that reached their eyes. Andre, the former Halcyon CTO, stepped forward to shake his hand, his grip firm and sincere. "Welcome home," he said simply. Luis made his way through the crowd, touched but slightly overwhelmed by the attention. He nodded his thanks, occasionally stopping to shake hands. He took the elevator to the top floor, the ride smooth and silent, giving him a moment to collect himself. There he found Kofi standing on the balcony, looking out over Brooklyn, the morning sun casting long shadows across the cityscape. "Still don't think I did anything special," Luis said quietly, joining him at the railing, the cool metal solid beneath his palms. Kofi turned to face him, a small smile playing at his lips, the first genuine one Luis had seen from him. "That's why you're the first person I trusted." A gentle autumn breeze rustled through the trees outside MOTSI's Brooklyn headquarters. 1 year had passed since the company's explosive launch, and its impact had rippled far beyond the tech industry. With offices now established in Atlanta, Detroit, Lagos, and São Paulo, MOTSI's influence stretched across continents, reshaping conversations about equity and inclusion in the digital age. Inside his minimalist office, Kofi Mensah gathered his belongings, preparing for another afternoon of mentoring. The walls displayed framed articles chronicling MOTSI's achievements. AI Ethics Revolution, the company that changed Silicon Valley's DNA, from bias to bridge building, MOTSI's global impact. But what caught his eye was a small certificate tucked in the corner, an award from a local youth coding program. The company he'd built had exceeded even his own expectations. Major universities were incorporating MOTSI's AI ethics curriculum into their computer science programs. The Clarion system had become the gold standard for detecting workplace bias, and companies worldwide were scrambling to meet its standards. But Kofi found his greatest satisfaction away from the boardrooms and tech conferences. 3 times a week, he taught coding and tech entrepreneurship at community centers across Brooklyn and Harlem. Today's session would be at the Riverside Youth Center, a brick building that had once been a library. He pulled on his favorite navy hoodie, different from the one he'd worn that fateful day at Halcyon, but similar enough to remind him why he was here. Luis, now Motzi's head of security and inclusion systems, nodded as Kofi passed through the lobby. "Another teaching day?" Luis asked, though he already knew the answer. "The real work," Kofi replied with a small smile. The community center classroom was alive with energy when he arrived. 15 students, aged 12 to 15, huddled around computers, their faces lit by blue screens. Most were black and brown kids from the neighborhood, many using high-end laptops provided by Motzi's education initiative. As Kofi set up his teaching materials, a 13-year-old girl named Destiny raised her hand. Her bright eyes sparkled with curiosity behind round glasses, and her natural hair was styled in elaborate braids. "Mr. Mensah," she asked, her voice clear and confident, "did you always know you were going to be a CEO?" The question made Kofi pause. He looked around the room at the eager faces watching him, faces that reminded him of his younger self, of all the dreams he'd carried and barriers he'd faced. He smiled warmly. "No," he answered honestly. "I just knew I was tired of being the only one in the room who looked like me." The students nodded in understanding. Many had already shared stories of being the only black kid in advanced math classes or coding clubs. Kofi reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a book. Hardcover, its jacket design elegant and understated. It wasn't available in stores yet. The publication date was still 3 weeks away. He handed it to Destiny, whose eyes widened as she realized what she was holding. "Your biography?" she asked, running her fingers over the cover. "An advance copy," he confirmed. "I want you to have it." Destiny turned the book over in her hands, examining it carefully. "What's it called?" "Scene," Kofi replied softly. The single word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Some of the older students exchanged knowing looks. They'd heard the story of Halcyon's fall and Motzi's rise. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with code, questions, and conversation. As the students packed up their belongings, Kofi noticed Destiny had already started reading the biography, completely absorbed in its pages. Later that evening, Kofi returned to his brownstone. The house was quiet except for the distant sounds of city life filtering through the windows. He made his way to his home office, where a single frame hung on the wall opposite his desk. Inside the frame was a screenshot from Halcyon's security footage, a moment frozen in time. Amanda stood at the front desk, her expression a mix of dismissal and annoyance. Luis stood tall and dignified, recognition clear in his eyes. And there was Kofi himself, quietly watching it all unfold, dressed in that old hoodie that had triggered so many assumptions. He approached the frame, studying the faces he knew so well. "You gave me clarity, Amanda," he whispered to the image. "You gave me a reason." The words weren't bitter or angry. They carried the weight of gratitude, strange as it seemed, for the catalyst that had forced him to stop accepting the status quo. Kofi moved to his desk and began powering down his laptop for the night. As he reached for his phone to set his morning alarm, a notification illuminated the screen. It was a message from the MOTSI team. "Tomorrow, our first AI launch into public education systems." He closed his eyes, feeling the culmination of a year's work settle over him. This peace wasn't born from victory or revenge. It came from something deeper, the knowledge that he hadn't just changed the rules of the game, he'd rewritten them entirely. The old system, with its hidden biases and silent complicity, was being dismantled. In its place, Motzi had built something that didn't just acknowledge difference, it celebrated it, protected it, amplified it. If you enjoyed the story of Kofi, I handpicked this next story. If you enjoyed the story of Kofi, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.